host and all of you for listening to us. And actually, it must be more than serendipity that I want to pick up right where Nikki left off. Because the name of, if there is one, what I want to talk about now is why poetry, because I don't want to answer the question what poetry is, because people ask me that all day long. They are always asking me what poetry is. It seems like an actual thing to do because I added a magazine called Poetry. But to make a serious point about it, you've heard already in the presentations today about the elasticity of poems, of poets, of poetry itself. There is no definition for poetry, so it's fun when people ask you to try to subvert that as quickly as possible. But that elasticity is real and must be an essential characteristic of poetry, however you or anyone else wants to define it. Now, the easy way out for me is simply to say, whatever I put in the magazine is poetry, because that's the name of the magazine. And if I say it's poetry, then it is. But to make a serious point about it, I've inherited this position. And the questions we're asking are actually contemporary, if not modern and contemporary ways of asking that question. I don't think people asked it as such. You heard in Rowan's presentation that you almost had to invent a large series of tomes to exploit the nature of poetry, because poetics was something we had to invent just as surely as the poets had to invent the poems that would be characterized by such a thing as poetics. So the elasticity is what the name of Poetry magazine was supposed to, in a way, short-circuit, and all of the editors who came before me, and I'm including myself in that lineage, have sought to sort of subvert that quite substantially. Now, this is a real case test, because Nikki was talking about Citizen. The thing about Citizen that I can tell you is that I published work from Citizen before the book came out. And this is before Ferguson, and it's really before there was any discussion of Citizen as we know it now. The world is different for people who talk about the book since the book came out. Now, the first thing that happened when we published Claudia's work in Poetry magazine and had her on the podcast, where she read the very poem that Nikki read for us here, is that I got hate mail asking me why I published such work, because it isn't poetry. So that Claudia's work on the page, Marjorie was saying earlier about how so much contemporary poetry is characterized by very little more than lineation. But we don't always publish stuff like that. And when Claudia's work appeared in Poetry, indeed, the hate mail came saying that without lineation it wasn't poetry, that it's prose. And it's a real question, not one that the poet asks, but it's a real question even for the publishers and booksellers of the world. And if you look at your copy of Citizen now and turn it over and look on the back cover, what you'll see is that it was not marketed to booksellers as a book of poems. It may say prose or criticism on it. It had to be sold to the marketplace as something other than what it manifestly was, which is poetry. Now, it often captures people's interest that I talk about getting hate mail, and I do. But the first editor of Poetry magazine, Harriet Monroe, received hate mail, which she relished. And the most enduring source to this day of hate mail relating to Poetry magazine has to do with the publication of the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock in Poetry magazine in 1915. When that poem, well, I call it a poem, appeared in Poetry magazine, the immediate response was that it was not poetry and it should not have been published in Poetry magazine. But most of the people who objected to it and said it wasn't poetry were critics. The most notable critic and anthologist of his time, Louis Untermeyer, wrote to Harriet Monroe, the editor, on 13 August 1915 to say this. And remember that Eliot was a young guy. He never really published any work in school magazines until Prufrock appeared in Poetry. So we're talking about a young poet. So this senior critic and thinker about poetry, Untermeyer, writes to Harriet Monroe and says, I confess that his love song is the first piece of the English language that utterly stumped me. As a post-impression, the effect was that of the muse in the psychopathic ward, drinking the stale dregs of revolt. The other Sunday night, there was a group at the house, one of those not too arts and crafty melanges. A few poets, a lawyer, a couple musicians, and one psychoanalyst. I read Prufrock to them quite seriously, and no one, not even James Oppenheim, who's the editor of Seven Arts, no one, not even James Oppenheim, who's the most serious person in this thickly populated universe, no one could keep a straight face. No one, that is, except a psychoanalyst who said, an extremely interesting case. I think a lot can be done for him. It's a muddled case of infantile repressions and inhibitions, which, as you can imagine, did not clear the air to any perceptible degree. Well, I suppose, since it takes all sorts of people to make a world, it takes all sorts of poems to make a magazine of poetry. So from 1915 to 2014, the question persists. Coming from the wrong quarters always, what is poetry? When I was 17 years old, I grew up in Tennessee, wanted to leave the South and get away fast, and I conceived of a plan to go to New York City. The way I would do that was go to school there. Someone else tipped me on to this way of getting out of town. And so as a teenager, I ended up taking a course at Columbia University in New York taught by Arthur C. Gatto, a philosopher. And the textbook for the course was a tiny little book. And the title of the book was What Philosophy Is. And what struck readers at the time, and certainly struck undergraduates at the time, was the idea that the title was wrong. Why wouldn't the textbook for the course be called What is Philosophy? With a question mark. Instead, it was What Philosophy Is, but it was a tiny book, a very small book. And the argument of the book is that it's not much help to be told what philosophy is, or to have it described or defined, but to engage in it. So for Danto, the idea was that philosophy was something you engaged in, you didn't define it. In other words, philosophy engaged in was an argument. I did very well in school, except in philosophy. That course mystified me, and Danto mystified me until now. Because now I make a simple substitution and say that it's not much help to be told what poetry is, to have it described or defined, but to engage in it, to do what Edison called argufy at most. Now, I don't have an academic career to speak of, though I have a PhD that I don't use much. So I'm pleased to be the last speaker here, and it's an honor to be invited. And I'm not presenting a paper as such in these remarks, but here's what qualifies me, and I'm grateful for the invitation because it was recognized that there's a way in which I probably read more poetry than anybody. It may be the case that I read more poems than anybody in the English-speaking world. I don't know what goes on in other parts of the world. Most of the activity relating to poetry on the internet emanates from Pakistan. So the amount of activity relating to poetry on the internet, if it's any gauge of anything, in the English-speaking world is so negligible as to be statistically insignificant. But nevertheless, operating within that realm, I read 150,000 poems a year that are submitted to Poetry Magazine with one colleague of mine. We don't have readers, we don't have interns. I read everything with Christina Pugh. And in addition to that, as you would expect, I read other Poetry Magazine's books that comes in, things people send me, sort of, informally, and so on. In other words, I'm a reader. And not only that, I happened to be at Poetry Magazine when it turned 100 years old in 2012, and to mark that occasion, Christian Lyman, who was then the editor, and I read every issue of the magazine going back to 1912, and they never missed an issue. And it was a harrowing experience. I never read so many bad things in all my life. For every Prufrock, for every Stevens, for every Gwendolyn Brooks. I mean, you can just imagine, if you ever go back and read those issues, what's very striking is that the touchstones, the work that stays with us, the work like Claudia Rankins that stays with us in its own time, failed to find a critical vocabulary that was sufficient to account for it. There were arguments, there were discussions, there were letters, there were book reviews, but nothing quite got to the point. And what that leads me to believe is that the editors and readers in their various times really could not distinguish between what we would call a good poem and a bad poem. And in a way, I think there's justice in that, because as somebody who reads all those submissions, what I would say is that bad poems are as memorable as good poems. For a while, I toyed with the idea that you could define a poem by saying that it is unignorable, that a good poem is unignorable. I still believe that in my heart. But on the other hand, bad poems are unignorable also. Some of the lines that float around in my head are lines from submissions, and I say this with no condescension, but only respect for people who write and send poems into the world. It's with humility that I say there's a thin line between what someone might call good poetry and bad poetry. Often what we think of as good poetry, like Prufrock, used to be called bad poetry. And more frighteningly, what we call good poetry will eventually be called bad poetry. This is inevitable. I'm happy to let myself off the hook as an editor when I think of Thomas Wentworth Higginson, who, as a distinguished editor in his time, passed up the opportunity to publish Emily Dickinson's poems, much as he seemed to have thought highly of them. So we know that we're in the wrong. But if editors who are people of experience, curators, people who care for poetry are so often wrong, what does that say about people who read poetry in their time? And what does it mean to be right or wrong about a poem? And who can be right or wrong when it comes to a poem? So in vain, I searched for definitions. And now I don't have to. They're thrown at me. And if you go on Twitter and you look at what we call poetry Twitter, all day long, little sententious bits are sent flying through the universe, quotations, 140 characters or less. Poetry is, and there's always a famous name, for the attribution. And I'm a normal person, and I think every single one of us that I've ever read can't possibly be right, and it amazes me that anyone would believe them. And so when somebody says to me, poetry is, I already disbelieve them because of the juxtaposition of the words poetry and is. It can't be right. And even though people like to hear things that sound right, in our hearts we must know that they can't be right. Some of the definitions of poetry that I like the most, even though they're not right either, include these. Charles Simic said, poetry is 3 mismatched shoes at the entrance of a dark alley. So that was good definition too. Carl Sandburg said, poetry is an echo asking a shadow to dance. That's not bad. I don't know what it means. And Gregory Corso said, poetry is a nose. On another occasion, Gregory Corso said, poetry is fried shoes. But Michael Domany, the formalist poet, much missed still apparently, said, the word poetry means a made thing and doesn't define anything. That's intriguing, but worries me. More recently, Jamie McKendrick said, every poem is an answer to the question what poetry is for. And in a way, the more memorable these quotations get, the wronger they are, and the more they resemble lines of poetry. So the genius of a remark like Corso's fried shoes is that it comes right out of the impulse that leads to his poetry. If you like his poetry, you have to buy into his definition of poetry as fried shoes, or poetry as a nose. So when we talk about this question, what is poetry? My impulse was to convert it into a different question, which is why poetry? Why do we have poetry? Why do we bother with it? The lines that were quoted in my introduction kind of tell you where I'm going. But you do look for guidance. And one of the other striking things about my having read so much 20th century and now 21st century poetry is how, and this connects up with what Marjorie Perloff was talking about earlier today, how much poetry seems to have scarcely changed at all, in good ways and in bad ways. What's remarkable is that we've seen in the presentations the kind of elastic forms and capaciousness that could have been done in the last 50 to 60 years, but were done centuries ago. And you have a sense that those poets would be in communication with our best experimental poets, that they would actually know how to speak to each other though they were all deprived of a common vocabulary because the criticism of poetry can never quite succeed in producing one. But what's striking beyond all that is that we seem to be stuck in the modernist age. And as an editor, I keep waiting for something to come along and replace it. Ezra Pound's notable early connection to Poetry magazine, working as the foreign editor for the magazine for Harriet Monroe, sort of unleashed a plague on the world of poetry, starting early on when he published a few don'ts by an imagist in its pages. These are things that you could trot out reliably in front of any writing workshop today, and most of the tenets he believed in are still believed in, and they're good sort of teaching things. I have a couple of them here, but everybody must be tired of them by now. Pound said, "Don't imagine that the art of poetry is any simpler than the art of music, or that you can please the expert before you have spent at least as much effort on the art of verse as the average piano teacher spends on the art of music." Another bit of account from that same piece. "Don't imagine that a thing will go in verse just because it's too dull to go in prose." Or this, "That part of your poetry which strikes upon the imaginative eye of the reader will lose nothing by translation into a foreign tongue. That which appeals to the ear can reach only those who take it in the original," and so on and so on. I mean, he churned these out almost all of his life till he stopped writing about poetry. And of course, most vivid of all was his idea that we should make it new. And of course, that phrase, "make it new," wasn't new, and it wasn't Pound's. Which Pound knew? It comes from, if the story is to be believed, Michael North writes about this. It comes from the Shang dynasty in China, about 1766 to 1753 BC. Supposedly, a Chinese equivalent of this "make it new" was inscribed on a wash basin. And that's where Pound got it. Make it new, in terms of the grammar of the phrase, as incisive as it is, does not and cannot be what people take it to mean, that you do something that has never been done before. Make it, the it pre-exists the new. The renewal is the effort that we're talking about. And one of the strains we see in 20th and 21st century poetry is the idea, especially with younger poets, that they need to be original, that they're doing something that has never been done before. And to be fair to that impulse, it's like Marjorie was saying, we don't want people to write the same kind of thing that might necessarily have been written in 1949 or 1909. But what I just tell younger poets is that the word original means that things have an origin. And that we have a responsibility to know about those things, to know what an origin is. It's a tricky business. Harriet Monroe published some of the greatest modern poets who ever lived. But she was a 19th century woman. She was 51 years old when she started a poetry magazine in 1912. And she wrote herself 19th century verse, very little of which, I'm sorry, Harriet, would hold up today, and very little which held up in her own time. But I've said this before, Harriet had a way of making boxes in order to think outside them, and in that respect, she was a poet. And if you remember what an editor of a poetry magazine 105 or so years ago had to contend with, remember this: poetry was not on a curriculum, contemporary poetry was not on a curriculum. You couldn't learn it in school. You didn't learn it in college, either here or in the United Kingdom, or really anywhere in the English-speaking world. There was no place for contemporary poetry. It appeared in periodicals, even in newspapers, but it didn't have a home. And Harriet famously looked around the city of Chicago, saw there was a lyric opera, saw there was a symphony, saw there was an art institute, and there wasn't a place for poetry, and she decided to create one. And what that would do is create a space or a box in which, in her time, a text box, in which poems, contemporary poems, could be shipped and moved around. And at that time, there was no monthly magazine of poetry in the English-speaking world. And today, except for Poetry Magazine, there is no other monthly magazine of poetry. So the idea that poetry has currency, that it goes out into the world and becomes part of contemporary movement, in the sense that Steph Burt described, or in the sense that a periodical is something that tells us the news as a word that stays news, was news. But if we think again back to that time, and you look at the correspondence between Harriet and William, people like Carlos Williams, you find that they fought many battles, the modern poets and Harriet. And they seem to us to be inexplicable until we remember that this idea of what a poem was before you printed it had to be invented somewhere too. So that there's a correspondence in 1919 between Harriet and Williams, in which Harriet, who published Williams, gets into an argument with him because she can deal with the step lines and off quirks and modernity of his work, except for one thing. He tended not to want to capitalize the first word in the first line of the poem, and she could not abide it, and demanded an explanation. And I'm paraphrasing, since I'm not a scholar, I can freely paraphrase. I'm paraphrasing. Basically, Williams says to Harriet, "You're a stupid woman." And they fought, and they loved each other dearly, and she continued to publish. Similarly, she publishes Hart Crane, and she publishes the famous poem about Melville's bones, but the problem is, even as she publishes it, she doesn't like it. So she gets into a correspondence with Hart Crane, which she publishes in the magazine because it's newsworthy. And she says she doesn't believe the images. Now this is having published the Great Images and the Great Images poem in a station of the Metro. When it appeared in Poetry Magazine, it doesn't look the way it looks now in the collections of Pound's poems. It has spaces. Spaces before and after semicolons. People are still surprised by it after 100 years. You just want to say, make it new already, but people can't get over it. And she could see these things and publish them, but she drew the line somewhere with Hart Crane, still publishing it. And she says, "I don't believe the images." And Hart Crane writes back to her, "You ask me how a portrait can possibly be wound in a shell. Without attempting to answer this for the moment, I ask you how Blake could possibly say that a sigh is a sword of an angel being. You ask me how the words compass, quadrant, and sextant contrive tides. I ask you how Eliot can possibly believe that every street lamp that I pass beats like a fatalistic drum. Both of my metaphors may fall down completely. I'm not defending their actual value in themselves, but your criticism of them in each case was leveled at an illogicality of relationship between symbols, which similar fault you must have either overlooked, in case you ever admired Blake and Eliot lines, or have condoned them. And I like the idea that the difficulties in a poem, what's illogical in a poem, is something we condone. There's a critical term you don't hear used much, at least I don't see it much. Hart Crane continues, "It all comes to the recognition that emotional dynamics are not to be confused with any absolute order of rationalized definitions. Ergo, in poetry, the rationale of metaphor belongs to another order of experience than science, and is not to be limited by a scientific and arbitrary code of relationships, either in verbal inflections or concepts. There are plenty of people," Crane says, "who have never accumulated a sufficient series of reflections, in these of a rather special nature, to perceive the relation between a drum and a street lamp, via the unmentioned throbbing of the heart and nerves, in a distraught man, which tacitly creates the reason and logic of the Eliot metaphor. They will always have a perfect justification for ignoring those lines and declaring them obscure." And so to this day, the emails come and accuse me of publishing poems that are obscure. You've had a long day, so I'll be brief. But I'd like to point out that to my mind is an editor, which means that I'm a fallible person, liable to be proven wrong before the day is out, if not at some point in the near future. It's not really true that poetry hasn't changed much in our time. It's just that people have only really just begun to look for it in the places where it was thriving all along. By that I mean work by poets with disabilities, work by poets of color, and so on. They are our experimentalists and our hope for the future, both in terms of poetry and, I believe, our own humanity. So I'll stop by reading another poem that I was accused of publishing under the guise of something else, which I'm proud to have done. But the idea is that it wasn't a poem, but I will argue that it is, though time will tell. If I had to define anything about poetry, I would have to define it in terms of the people who write it and read it. And what that means is that you have to think of poetry in terms of a body. I don't mean like the breath that Robert Pinsky talks about in poetry at all. I mean the wholeness of the body. I think poets are people who put their bodies in some place and then register something related to that. So I'll end with a poem by Dan S. Smith called Alternate Names for Black Boys, again, written and published before Ferguson and Everything That Transpired. Recently, an interview for a French philosophical political journal asked me whether the poets I admire most have come into their own since the election of our president, and I said no. They've been doing this all along, but many people haven't noticed until now. And the urgency may feel to some people different, but it's always been with the poets I'm talking about now. And Dennis is one of them. The title of the poem is Alternate Names for Black Boys. And the reason I'm ending with it, although I'm ending with it as a note of hope, is that we have an idea that poets are people who name things. It's a nice thought. It would be pretty to think so. But here the poet does not name things. The poet has to search for alternate names. Alternate names for black boys. 1. Smoke above the burning bush. 2. Arch nemesis of summer night. 3. First son of soil. 4. Coal awaiting spark and wind. 5. Guilty until proven dead. 6. Oil heavy starlight. 7. Monster until proven ghost. 8. Gone. 9. Phoenix who forgets to unash. 10. Going, going, gone. 11. Gods of shovels and black veils. 12. What once passed for kindling. 13. Fireworks at dawn. 14. Brilliant shadow-hued coral. 15. I thought to leave this blank, but who am I to name us nothing? 16. Prayer, who learned to bite and sprint. 17. A mother's joy and clutched breath.